CEO of the Dorothy M. Gillespie Foundation, which is an organization that fosters the legacy of the beautiful artist Dorothy Gillespie's life and work. Gary also happens to be the artist's son, so he knows her probably better than anyone. To date, Gary has traveled to 115 different cities to view and exhibit his mother's work. Current projects for him include mapping all of Dorothy's public art sculptures, recently transporting art to the Rockefeller State Park Preserve, and coordinating the transferal of Dorothy's private art collection to the Fort Wayne Museum of Art for our upcoming exhibition, Peer and Patron, Selections from the Private Collection of Dorothy Gillespie, which is set to open on September 3rd. So welcome, Gary. We're so excited to have you here, and we have a really good presentation in store, right?
I hope so.
Oh, I've seen it. It's really good. So, all right, I'm going to turn the reins over to Gary now, and we're going to start a presentation which will give everyone a little bit more info on Dorothy Gillespie's life and also her work. So, Gary, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jenna, and it's great to see you again. I want to thank you for the opportunity to let me speak about my mother and her art. I also look forward to visiting the Fort Wayne Museum of Art next month to attend the opening of the Peer and Patron, Selections from the Private Collection of Dorothy Gillespie. I hope you don't mind the plug. This will be my second trip.
We never mind a plug. Plugs are always great.
This will actually, let me put my stopwatch on so I don't go over. People know that I could go on and on. This will be my second trip to the Fort Wayne Museum of Art in the last 3 months. In May, as you know, I drove a U-Haul truck with art from the Dorothy M. Gillespie Foundation studio in the Catskills with outdoor sculptures for the exhibition Garden Party, Outdoor Sculptures by Dorothy Gillespie, another plug, that will be at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art until next June, I believe.
Yes, and they're beautiful. They've really enlivened the space. We've already had a lot of staff and visitors come up and say how beautiful they are. So.
Well, I look forward to seeing them when I come out next month. Well, my mother passed away in 2012. Actually, this is the 10th year anniversary. It's gone by so quickly because I've been so busy, as you said, traveling around to so many different cities. She died at age 92, and she left me quite the legacy. 2 art studios, one in Manhattan, one in the Catskills. She also left a nonprofit foundation, the Dorothy M. Gillespie Foundation, and hundreds of drawings, paintings, portraits, and sculptures. I've traveled to 115 cities, as Jenna said, meeting with museum directors, curators, university administrators, city officials, and collectors, learning about my mother, her art, and then sharing my plans for preserving her art and her legacy. At the age of 5, my mother knew she wanted to be an artist. She always said that was strange because she never knew what an artist was, never met an artist. Going through my mother's archives on the left, picture of her on the right, of course, I found this ticket, and it's very interesting. It's from 1925. It cost 21 cents. And it said that the person is entitled to a photograph of their child. So I'm looking at my grandmother's signature. The child's name is Dorothy, and the age was 5. So to me, this is gold, finding a photo of age 5, because that's when she knew she wanted to be an artist. At age 11, she won the first Roanoke, Virginia citywide art competition for children. She was encouraged to enter the competition by an art teacher who was a graduate of the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. That school was to become my mother's art school when she entered in 1938. MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, was founded in 1826 and is one of the oldest art colleges in the United States. On the left, you'll see that's her picture when she was in art school. On the right, during the summer, she loved to do sketches in Atlantic City. 1983, my mother received the school's first Distinguished Alumni Award. Here she is pictured with all her art behind her with Jeff Koons in the school's magazine of notable alumni. Jeff Koons is best known for the balloon dog. And if you've seen it, it's sort of a mirror polished stainless steel, and it actually sold for $59 million. Going through my mother's archives, I found lots of drawings from 1938, 39. And it's such a treat. I go up to the studio at least once a week and to see these drawings and then to look around the studio and go, well, how did she go from that to the metal sculpture? And that's the story I will be telling tonight. When she passed away and I went to her condominium down in Florida, I found this on the wall. And I'm only sorry that I never realized how important this was to her. It was her project. It was her design project, 1939, and it's gouache on poster board. And I would have questions if she were alive. And I always tell artists, children of artists, get those questions before your parents pass away. So, well, after graduating from art school, where do all artists go? You go to New York City. You go to Greenwich Village. And she did in 1943 and met my father. So during the day, she worked in a department store, and then at night, she painted and went to classes at the Art Students League. This is a portrait, a self-portrait, dated 1943. I'm always asked, why didn't your mother smile in any of her self-portraits? Well, my mother was a student of history, and throughout art history, happy self-portraits are a rare sight. My mother didn't paint self-portraits to practice conveying emotions. It was rather to experiment with colors, techniques, and styles of painting. This is a painting from 1944 titled The Dancers. It's from my mother's pre-abstract period, because you can see something. And when you can see something in a painting, it's not totally abstract. So later on, you'll see her totally abstract. This painting is part of a 29-piece Dorothy Gillespie National Traveling Retrospective from the Radford University collection. You can see this presently at the Castellani Art Museum at Niagara University, up in Niagara. Here it is seen with other abstract art paintings. And you can see the left is pre-abstract, moving totally to the right where you have total abstract. It's an unbelievable show. It's going to be there till November, and anyone who has an opportunity on the East Coast or up in that area should go see it. This is another early self-portrait, 1946. It's important because that was the date that she married my father, condition being no children. Well, Mom, how did that work out? She wound up having 3 children. If you look closely, you can see that she signed it Gillespie, Israel. I guess she was so excited. She was married to this man who was 10 years older than she was. And so she said, oh, I'm going to put his name on. Well, that's the last painting drawing I ever found, discovered that had my father's name, because I think that was the year she became a feminist. She said, why give credit to a man, my father, for a painting he had not done? And my father, one of the reasons why he didn't want to have children was because he was divorced and he had 2 children already. But knowing my mother, she was able to convince him. And that was unusual back in the 40s. For an artist in her 20s to have two children, young children, my sister was born in 47, I was born in 1949. Back then, women artists were not having children, but as you will hear from my presentation, my mother wanted to do it her way, and eventually she had 3 children. The year that my parents got married, they opened a nightclub. It was a very famous nightclub in the Greenwich Village. It's called Salle de Champagne. Celebrities, and I have a list of celebrities that attended. They drank champagne, they listened to the music. There was Cary Grant, there was Shelley Winters, Ed Sullivan, Marlon Brando, Lucille Ball, Montgomery Clift, Leonard Bernstein, Zero Mostel, Tony Bennett, Harry Belafonte. It goes on and on. I was just floored at the celebrities. It was sort of the Sardi's of the village at the time. Here's a photo of my father and my mother in the nightclub. Yeah, you can see in this photo, my mother loved to do nudes. At least that's what my father said. I never saw any as a teenager, but my father said she did nudes for about a year. And you can see on this left side, there's sort of a painting there too. On the left, you see my mother's self-portrait, and on the right, you see my father's portrait, which I still have in the studio. Although my father wasn't an artist, he played in a band, and here he is playing clarinet in the nightclub. My parents were very liberal, and they hired Black and gay staff for the nightclub. Well, the New York City police did not look favorably to that. And in 1951, they shut down the nightclub, and we moved to South America for 3 years. In 1954, after leaving Peru, we moved to Miami, where my parents opened another nightclub called The Gallery, of course. My mother not only displayed her artwork, you can see it on the walls there, but other women artists. She was always supporting other women artists. I know that she would be so pleased to know that next month, another plug for the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, will be having an exhibition of her private collection titled Peer and Patron. Many of the women artists that she supported over the years will be on display. Here she is in her studio in Miami, where we live, surrounded by her abstract. Now, this is the period where, if you look, it's all abstract. There's nothing but shapes. Unfortunately, this is black and white. You can't see the colors. But it was a time when she wasn't really painting colorful yet. That would happen later, and especially when she started to do metal. Here's a photo of her painting in her studio. She loved painting abstract because to her, every brush stroke was new and had never been done before. Here's a photo. The left photo was she started as a cathedral and decided that from then on, she would only paint abstract. She didn't want to dictate, tell the viewer what they should see. They should see what they want to see. Here are 2 more abstract paintings. She always felt that she had to paint large to be considered equal to a man. So this is in the 50s in Florida. This was at the Miami Museum of Art. At that time, my mother was the top female abstract painter in Florida, South Florida. And you could see by painting large, that would later influence her large metal works in the 1970s. That period also influenced how she signed her works. After completing a large wall mural, this was downtown Soho in Manhattan, a man came over and asked my mother who did the mural. My mother said she did, and the man looked at her and couldn't believe that a woman could create something like that. So she started to sign her works Dorothy Gillespie. Up to 1976, she only signed it Gillespie or D. Gillespie. But because of that incident, she realized she had to let people know that she was a female. So she would always sign it Dorothy Gillespie. And she always advised artists, young artists, always sign not only your first name, but your maiden name. Unfortunately, my mother's mural is no longer there as the building was torn down. This shows you, it's sort of like a pastel color. I am happy to say that the mural my mother did in 1979 in Roanoke is still there. And I was there last week, actually, and I parked my car in the lot next to the mural. So every day, hundreds, if not thousands of people pass by. As I travel around the country, I always enjoy seeing my mother's early paintings from the 40s and the 50s on display in museums and from their permanent collection. This is in the Virginia Fine Arts Museum in Richmond. When I was in Roanoke recently, last week, I had the opportunity to visit the Taubman Museum to see 3 paintings that are on display that my mother painted in 1962. And you can see now the colors, she's starting to have brighter colors, whereas in the 40s, 50s, they were dull. And the thought of metal has not even entered her mind yet. That will come later. Anyway, back to Florida. I remember when the photographer and newspaper reporter came to our house to do this story. I'm on the right, my sister on the left, my younger brother below. It was an article about my mother having it all. My mother was a wife, an artist, a hostess. She actually did it all, and that really sums up her life. Later on, when we moved back to New York City, she would become a filmmaker. She would host her own radio show, and of course, she would become a metal sculptor. It's a dangerous thing when your personality stands out from your work. What does that mean? Well, it means that it was time for my mother to move her family back to New York City. Why? Well, she was online at a grocery store. She had just had this big show at the Miami Museum of Art, and someone recognized her from being on TV or a newspaper or magazine. They came over to her, and my mother asked, well, what do you think about my art? And the woman said, oh, I don't know anything about art, abstract art. And my mother realized it's time to go to New York City to be anonymous, where you could create your art without any distractions. So the 5 of us went back to Manhattan. But my mother decided not to paint anymore. This was the time called the Happenings. And one of the shows she had was called the Flag Show. And in a New York Times article, Sunday New York Times article, Alfred Clark said a modern Betsy Ross named Dorothy Gillespie figured that she had cut, snipped, shaped, and painted about 3,500 stars of mylar, aluminum, and plastic materials for her one-woman show devoted to the representations of the American flag. My mother expressed her philosophy of art in the Flag Show. Quote, my basic idea is to involve the viewers in all of their 5 senses. Their sight by viewing the whole show, sound by listening to the tape of patriotic songs, touch by walking through the flag, smell by the odor of a deodorizer, and taste by drinking red scotch, white gin, and blue rye. And that's the article in the New York Times. I remember like it was yesterday, getting the Sunday Times, and how cool is it? You know, you're a teenager and your mother's in the Sunday Times. Well, it was time for my mother to do another happening, and that was titled The American Way of Death. It was described as a realistic environment of funeral parlors with coffins, burial lot plans, burial accessories faithfully reproduced with payment plans, prices, and attractive sale descriptions. My mother's interest in film as an art form was initiated by her experience in happenings, and she purchased a camera for the purpose of shooting her films in the future. This is a quote from my mother about her participation. If it weren't for her participation in happenings, she probably wouldn't paint the way she does today. After happenings, her paintings started to come off the wall and intrude into the spectator's space. During the 1970s, my mother encouraged more women's art in museums and art in public places. She was on the picket line in 1970 when women in the arts and other feminist groups protested at the Whitney Museum, demanding that the museum choose more women artists for their annual exhibitions. In a Times article, my mother said, quote, "The time has come for creative ways of getting attention." She and 5 other members of Women in the Arts made paint splash cylinders for the children to climb inside and roll around in Battery Park as attention getter for their cause. I have several of these barrels in the studio, so I'm really excited that I was able to hold on to these early works. During the 1970s, my mother became closely associated with the Women's Inner Arts Center. One of her first tasks was the creation of the Women's Artist Historical Archives. She conducted interviews with both well-known and lesser-known women who had made art their life work. According to my mother, quote, "It seemed essential to establish a central resource of this kind." Here she is pictured in front of the Women's Inner Arts Center. Her studio was also located in the same building. She was the artist in residence. She had it for over 40 years. In 1974, my mother organized a new group of New York professional women artists. Members lectured at universities and wrote articles to encourage women artists. That year, my mother organized an innovative outdoor exhibition titled Walk Through Art, which consisted of 12 walk-through triangles. Each triangle expressed the individual artist's style. The exhibition was mounted in Central Park, Battery Park, and traveled to 50 colleges, universities, and street fairs around the country. In 2001, my mother received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Women's Caucus for the Arts for her work, vision, and commitment to women in the visual arts. The medium of paper was very important to my mother's artistic development. Paper allowed my mother to move her art off the wall and also to work large. She believed that art on paper was compatible with our mobile society. It's easy to pack, easy to unroll, hang on the wall, and enjoy. This was her Paperworks exhibition at New York University. Art historian Francis Martin wrote about my mother, quote, "She is paper and paper is Gillespie." In a 1977 New York Times article, David Sherry wrote, "Gillespie uses simple white paper, lots of it in large sheets that she wraps around cylinders. What Gillespie does with paper is what endows her work with spunk." And I'm happy to say I have those cylinders, some of those cylinders in the studio. So when I give public tours, they're able to see each process of my mother's art, you know, from 2-dimensional all the way to 3-dimensional. Nancy Edgar wrote in February 1978 issue of Arts Magazine that eventually Dorothy Gillespie saw the drawback of paper, its fragility, and of course, paper doesn't work outside. So my mother began working with metal. First steel, this is steel, and then going to aluminum. This is a picture of a 43-foot steel sculpture that she created for Roosevelt Island in 1978. That's just off the coast, right next to Manhattan. My mother would later move away from steel to aluminum, which was much easier for her to move, create, bend. My mother loved to do portraits. In 1979, Lincoln Center had an exhibition of her portraits, and I'm happy to say that I have lots of her portraits in her studio and around the country. Radford University has quite a collection there, so I'm hoping to have more. One of the things that separates my mother from, I'd say, all artists that I've discovered that my mother knew, Louise Nevelson, George O'Keeffe, Lee Krasner, Grace Hartigan, all those great women artists, was how important education was for my mother. This is a list of 48 schools that I'm certain she visited, where she coached, mentored students, lectured, juried shows, and had exhibitions. I've personally traveled to 31 of them, met with school presidents, art department staff, museum and curatorial personnel to learn more about my mother's relationship with each school and to share my plans for preserving my mother's art and legacy. After each visit to the school, my mother would donate a piece of art, and it's always great for me to discover a new university. Just this week, Abilene Christian sent me pictures of the art that they have there. During the years 1985 to 1993, my mother was a Woodrow Wilson teaching fellow and made week-long visits to small private colleges throughout the country, where she gave lectures, coached, and taught young artists. It was an opportunity for these artists in small towns to work with an artist from New York City. So, and she loved it. My mother was recognized for her commitment to education by receiving the first Doctor of Fine Arts at Caldwell College in 1976. And she received an honorary doctorate in pedagogy, which is education. That's very unusual for an artist. Usually artists get honorary doctorate in fine arts, but Niagara University bestowed on her an honorary doctorate in education. To continue my mother's commitment to education, the Dorothy M. Gillespie Foundation has established art scholarships at colleges and universities all around. Well, now I'd like to show you photos of my mother's sculptures that are in museums, universities, performing arts centers, public buildings, parks, and in the homes of hundreds of my mother's collectors, though in this slide presentation, it won't be hundreds. The first two photos were taken in my mother's New York City studio. She had studios in Orlando, Hollywood, Florida, Miami, Dallas, and in the Catskills. A friend told me the first time she walked into my mother's studio, I felt like I was inside a music box. So much color, so much fun. She went on, she said, the joy she brings to others with her work is apparent the moment you enter her studio. Art can deal with the tragic and with the joyful. Your mother has chosen the joyful, which is often the more difficult path. This is another picture of her in her New York City studio. This is probably the largest sculpture she's done. It's in Orlando. Here she is bending the metal, and that tall piece that was in Orlando was destroyed by a hurricane, and she cut up the metal and created 720 pieces, and that's the new installation in the same location. And these are pictures in various performing arts center. All the art that I'm showing you now is visible. You can see it in all the cities, museums, universities, hospitals. I especially love going to universities, talking with the students. This was a treat. This is a ballet studio, and to have the children dancing and then having my mother's sculpture right above them, and how inspiring that is. These are the various hospitals that have her art around the country. It's a treat to go into collector's home and hear the stories of how the art was created. They would tell me stories about my mother. The photo on the left, they said that my mother was there for 4 days installing that. She insisted on installing all the art herself. I love this quote from David Sherry. Dorothy Gillespie is an artist that not only sees the wall, but also all of the space around it as a challenge. And it's so true. There was nothing that my mother didn't try, and she was very successful in everything that she did. From 1947 to 2012, she had 123 solo shows, 61 group shows, 35 commissions. She created sculptural sets for ballets. She gave lectures around the country at colleges and taught as a visiting artist at 16 universities. I love this quote. My mother, I could write a book with all her quotes. I attempt to portray immanent movement and energy, manipulating colors and materials so that the eye can carry some mystical message to the soul. And as Jenna said, the Dorothy M. Gillespie Foundation fosters the legacy of Dorothy Gillespie's life and work. And these are some of the grants, art and education grants, that I give out around the country. There's an internship where college students are invited to spend time in the studio, art donations to various nonprofits, hospitals, libraries. These pieces that are on loan, permanent loan, long-term loan. And that's it. Did I get in under 30 minutes?
I think you about hit it exactly. Wow, thank you so much. I love seeing all the beautiful, like the photos at the end of all the beautiful sculptures in people's homes. I mean, it just kind of shows how many lives she's really touched and how expansive her collection work is. I feel like, you know, like you said, there's such a long, fruitful career there. I mean, we could sit here for an hour and just dive in deeper to her incredible life and story. So thank you so much, Gary. We are now going to take some questions if people on the Zoom have questions, or also we're taking questions from our YouTube channel as well. Those will be fed to us from the comment section. We'd be happy to answer any of those. So let's see if any of those come in real quick. And just so while we're waiting on those, I'm going to ask you, Gary, one of my own questions, and that is, Gillespie was often labeled as a woman artist. That's something that she herself kind of latched onto. Do you think that she identified with this term later on, or was it something that she kind of struggled with her whole life, kind of trying to break out of? And then what were some of those difficulties that you think that she faced as a woman artist in the—
Wow, you really have done research. I admire that. So one of the reasons why she is known as a public artist and was back in the 40s and 50s, it was very difficult for women artists to get shows, exhibitions, and museums and galleries. So my mother looked at alternative ways. Of course, she had the nightclub. She was very fortunate at age 26 when she, married my father, that she had that opportunity to showcase her paintings. But she also wanted to show her artwork in public locations where people didn't have to pay to see it. And so when she had her outdoor shows in Central Park and Battery Park and all around the country, it was an opportunity for artists, maybe not as well known as her, because her work's in many museums. And as you said, she had a lot of solo shows and group shows, but a lot of the other artists that she supported didn't have that opportunity. So she was always looking at places where artists could show their art. And to this day, I don't know if she'd be pleased. I know she'd be happy about Lee Krasner getting her recognition, but it's still mostly male artists in museums, except I'm sure Fort Wayne Museum of Art has a couple of Gillespie exhibitions. So, and in 1979, you had a huge exhibition.
Yeah, would you like to maybe talk about that a little bit, and then I can elaborate as well?
Well, it was amazing. In my research, I never realized that one artist could, not just the museum, it was all around the town. It was in a bank. It was in public locations, 5 different places. She got the key to the city. And I'm just sorry that my mother, and this is, just that she left her children out of the art world. I had no idea in 1979 that she was going out to Fort Wayne. I learned all this through going through her archives. And it's just, if she were alive, I would just ask her questions about that show, that going out to Fort Wayne and having a citywide exhibition was just pretty extraordinary. And I'm just so happy that so many years later, we're having an exhibition that I had that opportunity to go out to Fort Wayne and basically thank Fort Wayne for, hosting my mother back then.
We are excited to have her back in Fort Wayne as well after over 40 years. It's pretty amazing. And we do still have one of the original sculptures that she installed on display currently in our sculpture court from that show. And it was very fascinating in the archives of the museum, the letters and things that our previous director at the time wrote, that Gillespie was one of the first artists he put on the schedule for that year after he saw her work in her studio. This was right on the cusp when she was breaking out into her off-the-wall public art sculptures. And this was also whenever right after she participated really heavily in the women's art movement. And I think the Fort Wayne Museum of Art has always been kind of a forerunner in that sense. If we look back to our collection in history, I think all of our directors have done an amazing job staying into the culture and progressing the museum, even though we're a very small Midwestern museum. We have a question. Why is Fort Wayne a city of and for art? By Joseph. That is a great question. Our downtown especially has really taken off in the last few years, and downtown is where our museum is located. One of the interesting things about Fort Wayne, I'm actually not from Fort Wayne. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. And so I was just indoctrinated into Fort Wayne about a little less than 2 years ago. But one of the things that's really unique about it is when the downtown campus was laid out, the arts organizations were all put on a campus together. It was called the Arts Campus. And so we have the Art Museum, and then next to us is a theater designed by Louis Kahn, who's a very well-known architect. And that was chosen specifically because they wanted to incorporate and intermingle all the arts with each other. So you have architecture, dance, art. Across the street, we have the ballet that also has an art gallery on the lower floor. Our Embassy Theater is just a couple blocks away as well. And downtown, the street art scene has really exploded as well. So our city has a really wonderful mural tour that you can take. We have, I think, over 30 murals in downtown Fort Wayne, and it just grows day by day. And we have so many young artists and musicians and all kinds of artists downtown as well that are constantly coming up with new ways to be involved and participate in our art scene. So it's been really wonderful. I did not know much about Fort Wayne before I came, and I was pleasantly surprised by the culture and art in this city. Somebody also said, if only we had Dorothy come to do a mural for us back in the day. I wish. That would be amazing. I love Dorothy's earlier paintings and work. as well, obviously, as her sculptures. But I think seeing the progression is very interesting, and it's very telling. I think it's very clear, I think, her journey from canvas to sculpture. One other thing that I wanted to throw out there, and Gary, we've already talked about this a little bit, but the upcoming exhibition that's opening in September is called Peer and Patron. And I specifically chose that title because not only was Gillespie a peer to these wonderful artists that we hear about today, Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, Helen Frankenthaler, Alice Neal, all of these really big names if you are a fan of contemporary art, but she was also one of their patrons, and she really supported her art community and felt very strongly, especially about bolstering female artists. Can you tell us a little bit about how she went about that in her career? I know you talked about swapping art, which is a little bit interesting.
Well, how about swapping jewelry? My mother loved jewelry and wound up with a Elaine de Kooning, Louise Nevelson brooch. And she was so proud of that. And I have 3 Louise Nevelson boxes that are going to be on display at the show. And then, of course, Alice Neal, she was friends with Alice Neal. And there's that story that I shared with you that my mother was insulted after she sat with Alice Neal for weeks having her portrait done, that Alice would charge her $10,000. And this is a lot of money back in 76. And you just don't do that. You just don't charge your fellow artist. Of course, now that painting is worth millions, but she never believed in buying art as an investment. You just buy it because you love it. And those women that she supported, there were stories behind them. Louise Nevelson and Alice Neal would fight. My mother did a lot of these conferences, and she said she had to separate the 2 of them. They were very independent and headstrong. But yeah, that was as important as her art was creating. It was important, that movement in the 70s, because she knew women artists just didn't have the opportunity to show their work. She always did. She always managed to show it. And that exhibition out at Fort Wayne is a good example. She had it all over the city. And that's a lot of work than just in one location. But she never
always insisted on making all of her own work, correct?
That's correct. Everything, this piece back behind me, it looks like one flat, but it's really not. It's cubed. It's like boxes. And that's why she used aluminum, because her early works, 1978, were steel. And that she needed her assistants to help move and bend it. But this she could do by herself. And that was important, that independence, not depending on a man. My poor father never had a chance with her. She was so independent. But yeah, supporting one another. And that's why this show is so important to her. I know if she's looking down or if she's looking up, people get upset when I say she's looking up. Well, she's checking out the colors below, maybe. But she'd be very pleased that it's coming back to Fort Wayne after 43 years.
Yes, we're so excited to have her. Thank you so much, Gary, for talking with me today. I think that about wraps up our question portion. I haven't seen any come in. And so I encourage all of our viewers to come see the current exhibition of Dorothy's sculptures in our sculpture court, which will be up until next June. And then also to come check out Peer and Patron, the selection of private works from Dorothy Gillespie's collection. It should be a wonderful show. Not only do we have works by all these famous artists mentioned, but we're also putting them in conversation with multiple pieces by Dorothy Gillespie herself to establish the fact that not only was she a collector of art, but she was a celebrated artist in her own right. I also want to note that we are having a curator's tour of the exhibition in October, on October 6th. That'll be led by me. We're going to go a little bit more in depth on a few pieces in the exhibition, so also feel free to join us for that. So without further ado, thank you so much, Gary.
You're
And we hope to see you all at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. Thanks
I'll
so
see you in
much.
a couple weeks.
Yes, we're excited to host you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.